Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jacob Finch, and I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years. Seen plenty of folks get lost, hurt, or worse in these West Virginia mountains. But what happened on Greenbrier Ridge that October still keeps me awake at night. It was a Monday morning when the call came in. 23 fourth graders from Charleston were supposed to come back Sunday evening from their camping trip. They never showed up. Parents were gathering at park headquarters demanding answers. My supervisor handed me the radio and the keys to my truck. "Jacob, you know that area better than anyone. Find those kids." I'd been working with youth groups for years, lost my own boy Timothy to cancer 5 years back, and helping other kids felt like the only good thing left in my life. Maybe it was my way of trying to make up for not being able to save him. The drive to Greenbrier Ridge took 45 minutes on winding mountain roads. Snow clouds were building up, and the temperature was dropping fast. These mountains can kill you if you're not careful, especially kids who don't know better. I found their campsite easy enough. 3 tents set up in a perfect triangle, just like the teachers taught them. But something was wrong right away. The camp stoves were still burning, with breakfast getting cold in the pans. Sleeping bags were laid out neat as you please, personal items scattered around like the kids just stepped away for a minute. But there wasn't a soul in sight. I called out, my voice echoing off the rocky ridges. "Hello? Anyone here? This is Ranger Finch." Nothing came back but my own echo and the wind through the trees. The teacher's car keys were still locked in my ranger box, just like protocol required. Their vehicle sat right where they'd parked it Saturday morning. 28 people don't just vanish into thin air, but that's exactly what it looked. Dead-like. I radioed back to headquarters. "Found the campsite, nobody here. Looks like they left in a hurry, but all their gear's still here." Static crackled back at me. "Say again, Jacob? You're breaking up." I tried the radio again, but got nothing but white noise. These mountains played hell with radio signals, especially down in the valleys. I was on my own until backup arrived. That's when I started looking at the ground. Tracking's been second nature to me since I was a kid. Learned it from my grandfather. What I saw didn't make sense. 28 sets of footprints led away from camp toward the old mining area. The weird thing was how they walked. The kids' prints were perfectly spaced, like soldiers marching in formation. The adult prints behind them looked stumbled, like they were sleepwalking, and some of those little footprints looked like they were walking backwards. I followed the trail through the rhododendron thickets, my boots crunching on frozen leaves. The temperature kept dropping the further I went. My breath started coming out in white puffs, even though it had been warm enough for shirt sleeves back at the campsite. The prints led straight to the old Greenbrier mine. I'd posted warning signs around that place years ago. Danger, abandoned mine shaft, keep out. The signs were still there, but somebody had walked right past them. Standing at the mine entrance, I felt something I'd never felt before in 16 years of ranger work. Pure, cold dread settled in my stomach like a stone. The mouth of that mine shaft looked like a wound in the mountain, dark and wrong somehow. My watch stopped ticking, just froze at 11:47 a.m. That should have been my first warning to turn around and wait for backup. Instead, I called into the darkness. "Hello? Is anyone down there? It's Ranger Finch." And from deep in that mine, impossible as it sounds, I heard children singing. The singing was soft at first, like it was coming from miles underground. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." The voices were high and sweet, the way kids sound when they're happy and playing. But there was something wrong with it. The song echoed in ways that didn't make sense, like it was bouncing off walls that weren't there. And I could swear I heard a voice I recognized, one that couldn't possibly be there. My son Timothy had loved that song. I shook my head hard. Grief plays tricks on you, makes you hear things that aren't there. I'd learned that the hard way after Timothy died. But those Charleston kids were real, and they needed help. I grabbed my flashlight and Coleman lantern from the truck. The beam cut through maybe 20 feet of darkness before getting swallowed up. The mine tunnel sloped down steep with old wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse if you breathed on them wrong. "Hello?" I called again. "Kids, if you're down there, call out. Your parents are worried sick." The singing stopped, just cut off like someone flipped a switch. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I'd taken maybe 50 steps into that mine when my radio crackled to life. "Jacob, this is Mike Patterson. Linda Morrison and I are heading your way with the ATVs and search dogs. What's your location?" I tried to respond, but all that came out of the radio was static and weird clicking sounds. The deeper into the mine I went, the worse my equipment got. First my watch stopped, then my radio died, and now my flashlight beam was getting dimmer, even though I'd put fresh batteries in that morning. But I kept going. Those kids were somewhere in this mountain, and it was my job to bring them home. The tunnel split into 3 directions about 100 yards in. I had to make a choice. The left tunnel had a string of small handprints pressed into the mud on the walls. They looked fresh, still damp to the touch. When I put my hand near one of them, my fingers went numb with cold. That's the tunnel I followed. The handprints led deeper and deeper. Some were so small they had to belong to kindergartners, but the Charleston group were all 4th graders. Their hands would be bigger. These prints looked like they belonged to much younger children. I found the first toy about 10 minutes later, a wooden spinning top sitting right in the middle of the tunnel like someone had just set it down. The wood looked old, hand-carved, not like anything you'd buy in a store today. When I picked it up, it was ice-cold and perfectly smooth, like it had been polished by thousands of small hands. That's when I heard the laughter. It came from ahead of me, echoing through the tunnels, children giggling and playing, the sound every parent loves to hear. But down here in this cold, dark place, it made my skin crawl. "Kids, is that you? Call out if you can hear me." The laughter got louder, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Behind me, ahead of me, from side tunnels I hadn't even noticed. I spun around with my flashlight, but the beam just showed empty rock walls and those rotting support beams. Then I saw him. Just at the edge of my flashlight beam, a small figure darted across the tunnel. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes that looked like they came from decades ago. Short pants, suspenders, and a cap like kids wore in old photographs. "Hey!" I called out. "Wait!" But he was gone, vanished into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. My hands were shaking as I continued down the tunnel. The temperature was dropping so fast I could see my breath like fog. Ice was forming on the mine walls, which made no sense at all. It was October, not January, and we were underground where the temperature should stay steady year-round. I found Mike Patterson's radio about 20 minutes later. It was sitting on the ground next to a pile of old lunch pails, the kind miners used in 1920s. The radio was smashed to pieces like someone had taken a hammer to it, but the lunch pails looked perfect, like they'd been packed that morning. When I opened one, there was a fresh sandwich inside and a bottle of milk that was still warm. "Mike!" I shouted. "Mike, where are you?" My voice bounced back at me from the tunnels, but with words I hadn't said. Instead of Mike, I heard Timothy echoing back. Instead of, "Where are you?" I heard, "Don't leave me alone, Daddy." I ran then. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 16 years of ranger training went out the window, and I ran like my life depended on it. But no matter which tunnel I took, they all led deeper into the mountain. The mine was like a maze that kept changing, leading me further from safety with every turn. That's when I found Linda Morrison. She was standing in a small chamber, her back to me, perfectly still. Her ranger hat was gone, and her blonde hair hung down like she'd been running through brambles. "Linda! Thank God! Where's Mike? Where are the kids?" She turned around slowly like she was moving underwater. Her eyes were completely black. No white, no iris, just empty black holes in her face. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice sounded like a child's. "Come play with us, Ranger Jacob. Come play with us forever." That's when I knew these weren't just missing campers anymore. Something evil lived in this mountain, and it was hungry. I backed away from the thing that used to be Linda Morrison, my heart hammering against my ribs. She kept smiling that terrible child's smile, her head tilted to one side like a curious puppy. "Don't you want to play, Ranger Jacob? The children are waiting." "Where are they?" I managed to whisper. "Where are the kids from Charleston?" She pointed down the tunnel behind her with one finger. "They're learning to be like us. Soon they won't need to go home anymore. Soon they'll stay and play forever." I fumbled for the pickaxe on my belt, part of every ranger's trail maintenance gear. The iron felt solid and real in my hands, something to hold on to when nothing else made sense. "You stay back," I warned her. "I don't want to hurt you, Linda, but I will if I have to." She laughed, and it was the most horrible sound I'd ever heard, like broken glass mixed with a baby crying. "You can't hurt us, Ranger Jacob. We're already dead." Then she rushed at me. I swung the pickaxe hard, expecting to feel it connect with flesh and bone. Instead, it passed right through her like she was made of smoke. She stopped moving and tilted her head again. "Iron hurts," she said in that little girl voice. "Why did you bring iron, Ranger Jacob?" I didn't answer, but something clicked in my memory. My grandfather used to tell stories about the old Cherokee who lived in these mountains. They said evil spirits couldn't cross iron, couldn't touch it without pain. Maybe that's why she backed away when I swung. "Where's Mike Patterson?" I demanded. "He's with the children now. He understands. Soon you will too." The temperature in that chamber dropped another 10 degrees. Frost started forming on the walls, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. More figures moved in the shadows at the edge of my vision, small shapes, children-sized, watching and waiting. "The children from Charleston," I said. "Let them go. They don't belong here." Linda Thing shook her head. "They belong to us now. We've been so lonely, Ranger Jacob, so very lonely for so very long, but now we have playmates again." "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been here?" "Since the mountain fell," she whispered. "Since the dark came down and the grown-ups stopped looking for us. But we waited. We always wait. Every few years, new children come to visit, and some of them stay." The pieces started falling together. The old mine records I'd read talked about a collapse in 1923. 12 children had died in a cave-in during a school field trip. Their bodies were never recovered because the tunnels were too unstable. "You're the children from the mine disaster," I said. The Linda Thing smiled wider, showing teeth that were black as coal. "We got so cold when the rocks fell down. So cold and dark and scared. But then we learned we didn't have to be scared anymore. We didn't have to be alone." More shapes moved in the darkness. I counted at least a dozen, all child-sized, all watching me with eyes like black holes. They wore clothes from decades past, overalls and dresses and shoes that looked handmade. Some carried old toys, wooden dolls, spinning tops, marbles. "What did you do to the Charleston kids?" I asked. "We're teaching them how to be like us. It takes time, but they're learning. Soon they won't feel cold anymore. Soon they won't hurt anymore. Soon they won't want to leave." I had to find those children before it was too late. But first, I needed to get past these things. I held the pickaxe out in front of me like a cross. "Let me through." The hollow children, that's what they were, I realized, hollow shells of what used to be human, stepped aside. They didn't like the iron, but they weren't really afraid of it either, like it caused them discomfort but couldn't truly harm them. I walked deeper into the mine, following the tunnel Linda Thing had pointed down. Behind me I could hear them following, their bare feet making no sound on the rock floor. But I could feel their eyes on my back, cold as winter wind. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and that's where I found them. 23 children sat in a perfect circle in the center of the chamber. Their eyes were closed, and they swayed slightly back and forth like they were listening to music only they could hear. Their skin was pale as milk, and I could see dark veins underneath, spreading like cracks in ice. The 3 teachers stood around the circle like guards. Mike Patterson was with them, his eyes just as black as Linda's had been. They all turned to look at me when I entered. Jacob, Mike said, but his voice sounded wrong, like a wrecker. Ding played at the wrong speed. You shouldn't have come here. Those children need medical attention, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Look at them, Mike. They're dying. No, said Mrs. Henderson, one of the Charleston teachers. They're becoming, just like we became, just like you will become. I knelt next to the closest child, a little girl with pigtails. Her breathing was shallow, and her lips were blue with cold. When I touched her forehead, her skin was like ice. How long do they have? I asked. The hollow Linda smiled. Not long now. By midnight, they'll be with us forever. Won't that be wonderful? No more homework, no more bedtimes, no more being sad. Just playing forever and ever. I looked around the chamber and finally understood the full horror of what was happening. The hollow children weren't just ghosts. They were feeding on these kids, draining their life force to keep themselves anchored to the physical world. And once the process was complete, the Charleston children would become hollow too. There's something else, Ranger Jacob, the Linda thing said. Someone special wants to see you. From the shadows at the back of the chamber, another small figure stepped forward. My heart stopped beating. It was Timothy, my son. He looked exactly like he had the day he died, thin from the cancer treatments but smiling the way he used to when I'd read him bedtime stories. Hi, Daddy, he said in that sweet voice I'd missed every single day for 5 years. I've been waiting for you. This was the moment I nearly lost my soul. Timothy looked so real I could hardly breathe. He had the same messy brown hair, the same gap between his front teeth, the same way of standing with one shoulder higher than the other. He even wore the Superman pajamas he'd been buried in. Timothy? I whispered. He ran toward me with his arms open, just like he used to when I'd come home from work. Every instinct I had as a father told me to catch him, hold him, never let him go again. But I forced myself to take a step back. You're not real, I said, though it felt like the words were tearing my throat apart. You're not my son. Timothy's face crumpled, and he started crying the way he used to when he had nightmares. Daddy, why won't you hug me? I've missed you so much. It's cold here, and I'm scared. Timothy died 5 years ago, I said, more to myself than to him. I held his hand when he passed. I buried him in the Charleston cemetery. I know I died, Daddy, but I'm here now, and I don't want to be alone anymore. He held out his small hand. Come with me. Stay with me forever, and I'll forgive you. Forgive me for what? For not saving me, for letting the sickness take me away, for not being there when I was scared. Every word hit me like a physical blow. This thing knew exactly what to say to break me down, knew every guilt I'd carried since Timothy's death. My ex-wife's words came back to me. If you'd spent less time playing Ranger and more time with your family, maybe you would have caught it sooner. I tried to save you, I said, and I could feel tears freezing on my cheeks. I tried everything. But you failed. Timothy's voice was gentle, understanding. Just like you're failing now. These children are going to die because you can't save them either. I looked around the chamber. The Charleston kids were getting paler by the minute. Some of them had stopped breathing regularly. Whatever the hollow children were doing to them, it was almost finished. But it doesn't have to be this way, Timothy continued. Join us, Daddy. Become like us, and you'll never fail anyone again. You'll never lose anyone again. We can be a family forever. For a moment, God help me, I almost said yes. The idea of never feeling that crushing guilt again, of being with my son forever, was more tempting than anything I'd ever wanted. But then I remembered something. The last thing Timothy had said to me in that hospital ruise, when the machines were beeping and his breathing was getting shallow. Take care of the other kids, Daddy. Make sure they're safe. The real Timothy wouldn't want me to let these children die. He'd want me to fight for them, even if it meant I couldn't be with him. You're not my son, I said louder this time. My Timothy was brave. He was kind. He would never ask me to let innocent children die. The thing wearing Timothy's face stopped crying. Its expression went cold and flat. "You're making a mistake, Jacob Finch." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." I pulled out the emergency flares from my pack and lit them. Bright red light filled the chamber, and the hollow children hissed and backed away. The false Timothy's face started to change, becoming something twisted and hungry. "Iron and fire," I said, remembering my grandfather's stories. "Salt and prayers. That's how you fight the dark things." I scattered salt from the miners' lunch pails in a circle around the Charleston children. The hollow things screamed when the salt hit the ground, a sound like wind through broken windows. "You can't save them," the Timothy thing snarled, its voice now deep and inhuman. "They're ours now. They chose to stay." "They didn't choose anything. You stole them." I swung my pickaxe at the nearest support beam. The iron blade bit deep into the old wood, and the hollow children shrieked louder. The whole chamber shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. "What are you doing?" Mike Patterson asked, his black eyes wide. "What I should have done from the start," I said. "I'm bringing this place down." I hit another support beam, then another. The hollow children rushed at me, but the salt circle held them back. They could reach through it, claw at me, but they couldn't cross the line. The fake Timothy grabbed my leg, its touch burning cold through my jeans. "You're going to kill everyone, Daddy, including yourself." "Better dead than hollow," I said, and swung the pickaxe again. The main support beam cracked with a sound like thunder. The ceiling started to sag, and rocks began falling. The hollow children's screams rose to a pitch that made my ears bleed. But the Charleston kids were starting to wake up. The little girl with pigtails opened her eyes. Normal brown eyes, not the black holes of the hollow children. She looked around confused. "Mister, where are we?" "We're going home, sweetheart," I told her. "All of us are going home." The tunnel entrance was 50 yards away through falling rock and screaming ghosts. I grabbed the little girl and shouted to the other children, "Follow me. Stay close and don't look back." Behind us, the hollow children's screams were getting fainter. The Timothy thing called out one last time. "You could have saved me, Daddy. You could have saved all of us." "I know," I said, "but sometimes saving someone means letting them go." Then the mine came down, and everything went black. I woke up in Charleston General Hospital 3 days later with frostbite on both hands and a concussion that made my head feel like it was full of broken glass. The first face I saw was my supervisor, Tom Bradley, sitting beside my bed with a look I'd never seen before. "How many?" I asked. My throat felt like I'd been swallowing gravel. 21, he said quietly. 21 kids made it out alive. I closed my eyes. 2 children hadn't made it. 2 families would be burying empty coffins, just like I had with Timothy. The teachers? All 3 survived, but they're in psychiatric care. They don't remember anything after Saturday evening. Complete memory loss. Tom leaned forward. "Jacob, what happened down there?" I thought about telling him the truth, about the hollow children and the mine that defied physics and the thing that wore my dead son's face. But who would believe it? "Cave in," I said finally. "The whole place was unstable. We got lucky anyone made it out." Tom nodded, but I could see he didn't quite be it. "The mine entrance is completely sealed now. Took 200 tons of rock to do it. Whatever was down there is staying down there." Over the next few weeks, I learned the rest of the story. The National Park Service classified the incident and paid the family's settlements with non-disclosure agreements. The media reported it as a heroic rescue from a tragic mining accident. The mine area was permanently closed to the public. I took early retirement and moved to a small cabin outside of town. The nightmares were bad for a while, but they got better when I stopped drinking and started going to grief counseling. Funny thing, talking to someone about losing Timothy helped more than 5 years of trying to forget. But the story didn't end there. About 6 months later, I got a letter from a forest ranger in Kentucky. He'd heard about the Greenbrier incident through the ranger network and wanted to ask me some questions. They'd found an abandoned coal mine with some strange activity. Children's voices echoing from deep underground, toys appearing overnight, temperature drops that made no sense. Since then, I've gotten similar letters from rangers all over Appalachia, always the same story. Old mines, dead children, strange phenomena. I started keeping a file, making notes, trying to understand the pattern. The Cherokee elders I talked to weren't surprised. They said these mountains have always had thin places, spots where the dead don't rest easy. The mining industry just made it worse, creating more dark places for lost spirits to hide. I developed a protocol for other rangers dealing with similar situations. Look for temperature drops, electronic malfunctions, and children's toys that don't belong. Iron tools and salt can provide temporary protection. But the only real solution is to seal the mines completely and permanently. The kids who survived don't remember, or what happened underground, which is probably a blessing. But some of them still have nightmares about being cold, about voices calling them into dark places. Their parents send me Christmas cards every year with pictures of their children growing up safe and normal. I never married again, never had more children. But I volunteer at the youth center in town, teaching kids about wilderness safety and respect for nature. It's not the same as having Timothy back, but it feels like something he would approve of. Sometimes on quiet nights in my cabin, I think I hear children laughing in the distance. But it's not a cruel sound anymore. It sounds like kids playing games in someone's backyard, happy and alive and free. I like to think that's the real children, the ones who found their way to whatever comes after, who aren't trapped in dark places anymore. I like to think Timothy is with them, looking after the younger ones the way he always did when he was alive. The hollow children of Greenbrier Ridge are sealed away now, trapped in their mine with no more victims to feed on. But there are other mines, other dark places where hungry things wait for the living to wander too far from safety. I keep my file updated, and I answer every letter from worried rangers, because somebody has to remember what's really out there in the deep places of the world. Somebody has to keep watching the dark. My name is Daniel Rockwell, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in the mountains, but nothing prepared me for what happened at Blue Heron that February. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. My supervisor's voice crackled through the radio in my office at Big South Fork National River headquarters. "Daniel, we got reports of vandalism at the Blue Heron mining site. Historical Society's all worked up about it. They want someone with mining background to take a look." I knew why they picked me. My grandfather Henry worked the coal mines for 40 years before black lung got him. My daddy too, until the accident in '62 took his leg and his spirit. I was the only ranger on staff who understood the difference between a tipple and a breaker, who knew why miners carried canaries and what a carbide lamp smelled like when it burned. "What kind of vandalism?" I asked, though I figured it was the usual. Kids drinking beer and spray painting curse words on the old company buildings. "That's just it. Nothing's damaged. But someone's been moving the mining equipment around, arranging it like it was still in use. And there's been sightings." "Sightings of what?" A pause. "Ghost miner. Walking around with a lamp at night." I almost laughed. "Come on, Bill." Look, I don't believe it either. But 3 different visitors reported the same thing. Man in coveralls and hard hat, carrying one of them old-fashioned lamps, always near the mine shafts. Blue Heron sat 18 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding mountain road that turned to ice at the first hint of winter. The old mining camp had been abandoned since 1962, when the company went belly up after a string of accidents. Now it was a historical site, a place for tourists to learn about Appalachian heritage and tours. He hired men who'd torn coal from the mountain's belly. I packed my gear that afternoon. My truck was a '92 Ford Ranger, tough enough for mountain roads but comfortable enough for long drives. In the back, I loaded my usual equipment: first aid kit, emergency shelter, satellite phone for the dead zones where cell towers couldn't reach. But I also packed my grandfather's old mining gear: hard hat, headlamp, safety rope. Family heirlooms I kept for sentimental reasons, but never expected to use. The drive took 2 hours through Cumberland Gap country, past farms tucked into hollers and trailers with satellite dishes bigger than the buildings. Snow clung to the pine boughs and made the world look clean, hiding the old strip mine scars and rusted car bodies that dotted these hills like ugly secrets. Blue Heron appeared around a bend in the road like something from a history book. A dozen wooden buildings lined what used to be Main Street, company houses where mining families lived, the commissary where they bought everything from flour to coffins, the schoolhouse where their children learned to read before learning to dig. At the far end stood the tipple, a massive wooden structure that had once loaded coal cars bound for cities where people never thought about the men who died to heat their homes. I parked near the visitor center and stepped out into air so cold it burned my lungs. The place felt empty in a way that went deeper than just being deserted. It felt abandoned, like the ghosts had packed up and left too. But as I walked toward the old mining equipment display, I noticed something wrong. The tools had been arranged in work formations, pickaxes leaning against the coal cart like someone had just set them down, lunch pails sitting open on wooden crates, hard hats positioned as if miners had just stepped away for a smoke break. The arrangement looked natural, like men had been working here moments before, too natural for vandals or pranksters. It looked like someone who knew mining, who understood how tools should sit and where workers would rest. Their gear. I pulled out my camera to document the scene, and that's when I heard it. A sound like metal striking stone, rhythmic and purposeful. The sound of a pickaxe biting into a coal seam. But that was impossible. The mines had been sealed for over 30 years. The sound was coming from mine shaft number 2, the only one still partially open to the public. I grabbed my headlamp and headed toward the entrance, following a wooden walkway built for tourists. Warning signs covered every surface. Danger, unstable ground. Do not enter beyond barrier. Mine, gases present. The pickaxe sound stopped as I approached, leaving only the whisper of wind through the shaft entrance. I clicked on my light and peered into the darkness beyond the safety barrier. The beam reached maybe 20 feet before the tunnel curved away into blackness. "Hello?" My voice echoed back, hollow and strange. "Anyone down there?" No answer. But the silence felt heavy, like something was listening. I climbed over the barrier. I shouldn't have. It violated every safety protocol. But I was a park ranger investigating vandalism, and rangers don't turn back because of spooky feelings. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, supported by wooden beams that creaked under the mountain's weight. My footsteps echoed ahead of me, and somewhere in that echo I heard other footsteps, like someone walking just out of sight around the next bend. 20 yards in, I found fresh coal dust on the tunnel floor, not the old, settled dust that had been here for decades, but new black powder still settling from recent disturbance. I knelt and touched it, fine as flour and darker than midnight. Further ahead, my light caught something that made my blood run cold. Fresh tool marks on the coal seam, cut so new they still showed the bright black interior where someone had chipped away chunks of coal. The marks form at a rough rectangle, about the size a man could extract in an hour of hard work. But who was working down here, and why? I followed the tunnel deeper, past side passages that branched off into impenetrable darkness. The air grew colder and carried a metallic taste that reminded me of old pennies. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the drip of water and the subtle groaning of wooden supports settling under tons of rock. That's when I found the lunch pail. It sat on a wooden crate beside the coal face, an old-fashioned metal bucket with a tight-fitting lid. Steam rose from the coffee cup beside it, and when I lifted the lid, the smell of fresh cornbread and bacon filled the tunnel. The food was warm. I jerked my hand back like I'd touched a snake. Someone had been here minutes ago. Had to be. The coffee was still hot, the cornbread still soft. But I hadn't passed anyone on my way in, and there was only one entrance to this tunnel. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "I'm a park ranger. I need to talk to whoever's down here." The echo died away into silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the mine, came the sound of voices. Men talking quietly, their words too distant to understand, but their tone clear enough. They were discussing work, shift schedules and coal quotas and families waiting at home. I followed the voices deeper into the mine, past rooms carved from solid coal, and intersections where multiple tunnels branched off like the fingers of a buried hand. The voices stayed ahead of me, always just around the next corner or beyond the next chamber. My light began to flicker. The battery was new, but something about this place seemed to drain it faster than normal. In the brief moments when the beam wavered, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't belong to me, shapes that looked like men in coveralls walking parallel passages, just beyond my sight. Then I turned a corner and saw him. He stood about 30 yards ahead, his back to me as he worked a coal seam with steady, practiced strokes. He wore faded coveralls and a hard hat with a carbide lamp that cast a bright circle of light on the coal face. The rhythm of his pickaxe never varied. Strike, chip, strike, chip, and coal chunks fell at his feet like black snow. "Excuse me," I called. He didn't turn around or acknowledge my presence. The pickaxe kept rising and falling with mechanical precision. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I need you to come with me." Still no response. I was close enough now to see the details of his clothing: wool pants held up by suspenders, heavy boots that looked handmade, a metal lunch pail hanging from his belt. His clothes looked old-fashioned, like something from a museum display. I reached out to touch his shoulder. My hand passed through empty air. The miner was gone. No footsteps, no sound of retreat. 1 second he was there, solid as stone, and the next I was alone in the tunnel with only the echo of my own breathing. But the fresh coal chips at my feet were real. The tool marks on the coal seam were real, and when I held my breath and listened carefully, I could still hear the distant sound of pickaxes striking stone, the rumble of coal cars on phantom tracks, and the voices of men who should have been dead for 30 years. I stumbled out of the mine shaft with my heart hammering against my ribs. The daylight seemed too bright after the tunnel darkness, and I stood blinking like a mole until my eyes adjusted. My hands were shaking. From cold, I told myself. Not fear. Back at my truck, I checked my equipment. The camera had malfunctioned underground, producing only black images despite the flash firing. My gas detector, designed to warn of dangerous methane levels, had gone haywire in the tunnel, beeping frantically before shutting down completely. I called headquarters on the satellite phone. "Bill, it's Daniel. There's DeFi. Nightly someone working these mines illegally. I found fresh excavation and warm food. You see anybody?" I hesitated. "How do you tell your supervisor you saw a ghost?" "Someone's been down there recently, real recently. I'm going to set up surveillance tonight, catch them in the act." "Be careful, Daniel. Mountain folks don't like government interference. And some of them old mining families still think they got rights to these tunnels." That evening, I made camp in the old mine supervisor's office, a wooden building with windows that overlooked the main shaft entrances. I set up my sleeping bag on the floor and positioned my equipment where I could monitor the site. Through the windows, I could see the dark mouths of the mine shafts, like dead eyes staring back at me. Around midnight, the lights started. Carbide lamps flickered to life in tunnel entrances across the site. Not flashlights or electric lanterns, but the distinctive yellow glow of carbide flames dancing in the darkness. The lights moved with purpose, traveling along paths that followed the old mining routes. I grabbed my binoculars and watched figures emerge from the tunnels. Men in mining gear, carrying tools and lunch pails, moving with the tired gait of workers ending a long shift. They walked in groups, talking quietly, their lights bobbing like fireflies in the mountain darkness. But when I tried to focus on individual faces, the figures became indistinct, more shadow than substance. They seemed solid from a distance, but blurred at the edges when I looked directly at them. One group passed directly beneath my window. I could hear their boots on the gravel, could smell the coal dust and sweat and carbide smoke that clung to their clothes. Their voices drifted up through the cold air. "Pulled 8 tons from the number 3 seam today. Foreman says we're behind quota. Company's pushing for 10 tons, minimum. My boy's sick again. Wife says it's the coal dust, but what choice we got?" They were discussing quotas and working conditions like any group of miners, except these men had been dead since 1958. I tried to photograph them through the window, but the camera produced the same black images as in the tunnel. Every shot came out empty, as if I'd been photographing darkness itself. Around 2 in the morning, I dozed off despite my best efforts to stay alert. I dreamed of working underground, swinging a pickaxe until my back ached and my hands bled. In the dream, I knew every tunnel and every coal seam like they were carved into my memory. I knew the names of the other miners, knew which ones had families waiting at home and which ones drank their paychecks away before Friday night. I woke to the sound of voices outside the building. Not the distant conversations of the phantom miners, but clear, close voices that seemed to be coming from just beyond the door. New man's been asking questions. Supervisor wants to talk to him. About time someone paid attention to what happened down there. I crept to the window and looked out. 3 men stood in the yard, their carbide lamps creating a circle of light in the darkness. They wore the coveralls and hard hats of miners, but their faces were pale, and their eyes reflected light like animals' eyes in headlight beams. One of them looked directly at me through the window and nodded. "Morning shift starts in 4 hours," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. "You coming down, or you just going to watch from up here?" Before I could respond, they turned and walked toward mine shaft number 3, the shaft that had been sealed with concrete after the 1958 disaster. As they approached the entrance, the concrete barrier seemed to fade like morning mist, revealing the dark tunnel mouth beyond. They disappeared into the mine, and the concrete reappeared as solid as ever. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the window with my back against the wall, watching lights move through tunnels that were supposed to be empty. Every few hours, groups of miners would emerge from various shafts, punch time cards at stations that no longer existed, and walk toward the old company houses where no families had lived for 30 years. By dawn, I understood that Blue Heron was still an active mining operation. The only difference was that all the workers were dead. The next morning brought a cold rain that turned the mining camp into a muddy mess. I walked among the old buildings trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. In daylight, everything looked normal. Just another historical site with rusted equipment and weathered wood. But in the mine supervisor's office, I found something that made my skin crawl. A clipboard hung on a nail beside the door, holding fresh time cards with familiar names. Thomas Hensley, Buck Mullins, Joe Sizemore, Ray Gibson. 17 names total, each with timestamps showing they'd clocked in for the night shift at 11 o'clock p.m. and clocked out at 7 o'clock a.m. The dates on the cards showed February 15, 1958, the day of the mine disaster. I'd researched the Blue Heron tragedy when I first took this assignment. 17 miners had been trapped in shaft number 3 when a section of tunnel collapsed, blocking the main exit and flooding the lower levels with groundwater. The company had declared the rescue too dangerous and sealed the mine with the bodies still inside. But, according to these time cards, those 17 men were still reporting for work every night. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see a man in a mine supervisor's uniform standing in the doorway. He was older than the others, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from a lifetime underground. His hard hat bore the insignia of a shift foreman. "You must be the new safety inspector," he said, his voice gravelly from years of breathing coal dust. "Bobbed. Out time someone showed up. We got serious problems down in number 3. I stared at him, unable to speak. He looked completely solid, as real as anyone I'd ever met. "Name's Buck Mullins," he continued, extending a calloused hand. "Been running this operation since '52. You hear about the cave-in?" "The cave-in happened 36 years ago," I managed to say. Buck's expression didn't change. 36 years. Son, that cave-in happened yesterday evening. Got 17 good men trapped down there, and the company's talking about sealing the tunnel instead of digging them out." He pointed toward mine shaft 3, and I could see it clearly now. Not the concrete sealed entrance I knew, but an open tunnel with wooden supports and rail tracks leading into darkness. "We've been trying to dig through the collapse all night," Buck said, "but we need proper equipment, need more men. These boys won't leave their posts until we get everyone out safe." I followed his gaze and saw other miners working around the shaft entrance. They were digging with hand tools, passing buckets of rubble in a human chain, working with the desperate efficiency of men trying to save their friends. "Mr. Mullins," I said carefully, "what year do you think this is?" "February 16th, 1958. What kind of question is that?" The weight of understanding hit me like a physical blow. These men had been trapped not just by rock and earth, but by time itself. They were reliving the disaster over and over, trying to rescue their trapped coworkers without understanding that they themselves were the ones who needed saving. "Buck," I said, "I need to show you something." I led him to my truck and retrieved a folder of historical documents I had brought for reference. Newspaper clippings from 1958, company records, obituaries for the 17 dead miners. I spread them on the hood of the truck and watched Buck's face as he read. 17 miners confirmed dead in Blue Heron disaster, he read aloud. His hands began to shake. Company officials declare rescue operation too dangerous to continue. New. Mine shaft sealed permanently. He looked up at me, confusion and growing horror in his eyes. "These names, these are my boys, but they're not dead. They're right there working the rescue." "Look at the date on the newspaper, Buck." He squinted at the small print. "February 20th, 1958. But that's 4 days from now." "No," I said gently. "That was 36 years ago. You've been trying to save them for 36 years, but they don't need saving anymore. You're all together now." Buck stared at the newspaper clippings, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally, terrible understanding. "We're dead," he whispered. "All of us. The cave-in trapped all 17 of you in Shaft 3. But you died heroes, Buck. Every one of you stayed behind to help the others. You could have run, could have saved yourselves, but you wouldn't abandon your crew." Tears ran down his weathered cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the coal dust. "The boys, they got families waiting, wives and children who need them. Their families lived full lives, Buck. They honored your memory, told stories about your bravery. Your sacrifice meant something. It changed how mines operate, made them safer for the men who came after." Buck looked toward Shaft 3, where his crew continued their eternal rescue operation. "How do we tell them?" "You're the shift supervisor," I said. "They'll listen to you. You can end their shift, Buck. You can finally let them go home." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Will you help me? Will you bear witness to what we did down there?" "I promise," I said. "I'll make sure people remember." Buck Mullins straightened his shoulders and walked toward his crew with the authority of a man who'd spent his lifetime taking care of other men. I followed, watching as he gathered his workers around Shaft 3. "Boys," he said, his voice carrying across the mining camp, "I got something to tell you about the rescue operation." Buck stood before his crew in the gray morning light, 17 dead miners, gathered around their foreman like they had countless times during their lives. They looked at him with the trust that comes from working together in dangerous places, trusting your life to the man beside you every single day. "We've been trying to save those boys trapped in Shaft 3, Buck said. "Been working all night, digging through that cave-in." "Ain't making much progress, boss," said Thomas Hensley, a young miner who couldn't have been more than 25. "Rocks packed tight as concrete." "That's because there ain't nobody to save, Thomas. The boys trapped in that shaft. That's us. We're the ones who got caught in the cave-in." The miners looked at each other with growing confusion. Joe Sizemore, an older man with kind eyes, shook his head. "That don't make sense, Buck. We're standing right here." "I know it's hard to understand," Buck said. "But we died in that tunnel 36 years ago. Been working the same shift over and over trying to fix something that can't be fixed." I stepped forward, holding the newspaper clippings. "Your families held memorial services. Your names are on monuments. The whole community honored what you did, staying behind to help each other instead of running for safety." "My Sarah," whispered Ray Gibson. "My little girl." She was only 3 when I... How old would she be now? 39, I said. She became a teacher, got married, had children of her own. She named her son after you. One by one, the miners began to understand. The weight of 36 years settled on them like coal dust, and with it came a mixture of sadness and relief. They had been holding on so long, trying to complete an impossible rescue, that they'd forgotten they were the ones who needed to be saved. "What happens now?" asked Thomas. Buck looked at me, then back at his crew. "Now we punch out. Our shift is over." He walked to the time clock, too, had materialized beside the mine entrance, the same clock where they'd punched in on February 15th, 1958. One by one, the miners approached and punched their cards. The metallic chunk of the timestamp echoed across the camp like a funeral bell. As each man punched out, he began to fade, becoming transparent like morning mist. But they didn't look afraid. They looked peaceful, like men heading home after a long, hard day of honest work. Thomas was the last to approach the time clock. Before punching his card, he turned to me. "Will you tell my Sarah I'm proud of her? Tell her Daddy's been watching over her all these years?" "I will," I promised. He punched his time card and smiled as he began to fade. "Thanks for listening to our story, Ranger. Thanks for helping us find our way home." Buck was the last to go. As his crew disappeared one by one, he stood straighter, the weight of command finally lifting from his shoulders. "You'll keep your promise?" he asked. "You'll make sure people remember what happened here?" "I'll make sure they know you were heroes," I said. Buck nodded and walked to the time clock. Before punching his card, he turned to look one last time at the mine that had been his prison and his purpose for 36 years. "End of shift," he said, and punched the card. The sound echoed across Blue Heron, and Buck Mullins faded into the morning light with a smile on his weathered face. I stood alone in the mining camp as the phantom equipment disappeared and the time clock faded back into memory. The oppressive weight that had hung over the place was gone, replaced by a peaceful silence that felt like a prayer answered. 6 months later, I stood before a crowd gathered at Blue Heron for the dedication of the memorial wall. 17 names were carved into black granite, along with the words, "They stayed behind so others might live. Their shift is finished. Ally over." Among the crowd were elderly women who had been young wives in 1958, grown children who barely remembered their fathers, and grandchildren who had grown up hearing stories of heroes who worked the deep mines. Sarah Gibson, now Sarah Matthews, placed flowers at the base of the memorial. "Thank you," she said to me. "Thank you for bringing them home." I still work at Big South Fork, still patrol the mountains and hollers of coal country. But Blue Heron is different now. Visitors come to learn about mining heritage, and they find a place of peace rather than restless spirits. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear the distant sound of pickaxes in the mountain, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. It sounds like men taking pride in honest work, like the rhythm of progress, like the heartbeat of mountains that remember the stories of everyone who has ever called them home. The miners of Blue Heron are finally at rest. Their shift is over, and they've gone home at last. My name is Michael Vance, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, up on Cheat Mountain, where the air gets thin and the trees grow thick. People always ask me how I ended up here, so far from everything. The truth is, I came here to hide. Before I became a ranger, I was a pilot in the Air Force. I loved flying more than anything in the world. But one night, flying over Nevada, I saw something that changed everything. A craft that moved like nothing I'd ever seen, silent and fast, with lights that hurt to look at. I reported it like I was supposed to. That was my mistake. They took my pilot license away, said I had credibility issues, said I couldn't tell the difference between a weather balloon and what I'd seen with my own eyes. My career was over. My friends stopped calling. My wife left me. So I came to the mountains, where the only things flying around were birds and bugs. I was 38 when I started working for the Park Service. I thought I knew everything about nature, about what was normal and what wasn't. I was wrong about that too. It was October 1977 when everything started. The leaves were turning red and gold, and tourists were coming up to see the colors. Cheat Mountain sits at 4,300 feet, high enough that you can see for miles when the weather's clear. The Cherokee used to call this place sacred. Now I know why. The trouble started with the animals. First, it was just weird behavior. Birds flying in circles, dogs barking at empty sky, cattle bunching together like they were scared. Then Eugene Metheny called. Eugene owned a farm down in the valley, about 5 miles from the base of the mountain. He'd been raising sheep for 30 years and never lost one to anything bigger than a coyote. But when I drove out to his place that Tuesday morning, I found something that made my stomach's turn. 3 sheep lay dead in his pasture. But these weren't normal kills. These animals had been torn apart by something with claws as big as my hand. 4 parallel gashes ran down their sides, deep enough to show bone. The wounds were clean, like surgical cuts, but no predator I knew could make marks like that. I heard it last night, Eugene told me, his hand shaking as he lit a cigarette. Sounded like wind, but there wasn't any wind. Then this shadow passed over the moon. Biggest bird I ever seen, Mr. Vance. Had eyes like brake lights. I measured the claw marks. 8 inches from tip to tip. I took pictures, collected samples, did everything by the book. But I couldn't stop staring at those wounds. Whatever made them was strong enough to punch through skin and muscle like paper. That night, I set up my equipment on the mountain. Wildlife cameras, motion sensors, the works. I told myself it was probably a bear, maybe a big cat that wandered down from Canada. Animals got bigger in people's minds when they were scared. That's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, in the part of my brain that still remembered flying through empty sky and seeing impossible things, I knew this was different. When I checked the cameras the next morning, half of them weren't working. The ones that did work showed nothing but static at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every single camera went dead at the same time, like something had sent out a pulse that fried all the electronics at once. That's when I knew I was in trouble. The second attack happened 3 days later at Carl Pyle's place up on Laurel Run. Carl was a hunter, the kind of man who knew every animal in these mountains. When he called me, his voice was different than Eugene's. Eugene had been scared. Carl was terrified. "You need to see this," he said, "and bring your camera." I drove up the winding dirt road to his cabin. Carl met me at the edge of his property, carrying a rifle and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "It took my bull," he said. 800 pounds of black Angus, and it carried him off like he was a rabbit. We walked to his pasture. The grass was torn up where the bull had been dragged. But the drag marks only went about 50 feet, then stopped. Just stopped, like the animal had been lifted into the air. "I saw it," Carl whispered. "Sitting on my barn roof at dawn. Wings spread wider than the whole building. Had to be 15 feet across, maybe more. When it saw me looking, it made this sound. Like a steam engine, but deeper. Then it took off without making any noise at all." I looked up at his barn. The metal roof was dented in 4 places, each dent about the size of a dinner plate. Whatever had landed there weighed at least as much as a small car. "There's something else," Carl said. He led me around to the back of his cabin where his garden used to be. Now it looked like someone had driven a truck through it, but in the middle of all that destruction, clear as day, was a footprint. It was huge, 12 inches long with 3 toes that ended in sharp points. But the weird part was the depth. The print was pressed almost 2 inches into hard-packed soil. I'd seen bear tracks, big cat tracks, even tracks from circus animals that had escaped years ago. This was something else entirely. I made a plaster cast of the print and took more pictures. But when I developed the film later, half the shots came out blurred, like something had been moving too fast for the camera to catch. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that footprint, about the way Carl's voice shook when he described the thing on his roof. I got up around midnight and made some coffee, then sat by my kitchen window looking out at the mountain. That's when I saw the lights. They weren't normal lights. They moved up the mountainside like slow lightning, red and pulsing. They'd appear for a few seconds, then vanish, then show up somewhere else entirely. I grabbed my binoculars and it tried to get a better look, but every time I focused on a light, it disappeared. I was watching those lights dance around the peak when my radio crackled to life. "Ranger Vance, you there?" It was Jim Morrison, the night dispatcher. Jim never called unless something was really wrong. "I'm here, Jim. What's going on?" "We got hikers trapped up on the North Trail. Say something big is circling their camp. They're too scared to move." I looked at my clock. 2:30 a.m. "I'll head out there now." "Be careful, Mike. These folks sound really shook up." I loaded my truck with flares and emergency gear, then started up the mountain. The North Trail was a tough climb even in daylight. At night, with clouds covering the moon, it was like driving through a tunnel. I found the hikers about 3 miles up, huddled around a dying campfire. There were 4 of them, 2 couples from Ohio who'd come to see the fall colors. Now they sat back to back, scanning the trees with flashlights that shook in their hands. "Thank God you're here," one of the women said. "It's been circling us for 2 hours. "What has?" "We don't know," her husband answered. "Something big. We can hear it in the trees, but we never see it. Sounds like wings, but nothing that big should be able to fly." As if it had been waiting for him to say that, something moved in the darkness above us. Not moved, glided. I caught just a glimpse of it against the stars, a shadow bigger than any bird I'd ever seen. Then it made a sound. Have you ever heard a steam whistle from an old train? That's the closest I can come to describing it, but deeper, like it was coming from inside a cave. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the mountainside until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. The hikers grabbed each other and pressed closer to the fire. I reached for my radio, but when I tried to coo, all for backup, all I got was static. "We need to get you folks off this mountain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right now." It took us an hour to pack up their camp and get everyone down to the parking area. The whole time, I could feel something watching us from the trees. Every few minutes, we'd hear that whistling sound, always from a different direction, like whatever was making it was following us down the mountain. When we finally reached the road, I helped the hikers load their car. As they drove away, one of them rolled down his window. "Ranger, what do you think that was up there?" I wanted to tell him it was just an owl or wind in the trees or anything normal, but I'd seen that shadow against the stars. I'd heard that sound that no earthly creature should make. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to find out." Word spread fast after that night. By the end of the week, I had 6 more reports of dead livestock, 3 sightings of something big flying over the mountain, and 1 very scared pilot who swore something had paced his small plane for 5 miles before disappearing into the clouds. The state sent a wildlife biologist named Dr. Sarah Chen to help with the investigation. She was smart, thorough, and completely convinced that we were dealing with a normal predator that people were exaggerating because they were frightened. "Probably a large bear," she told me as we examined the latest kill site. "People see what they expect to see. Fear makes everything bigger and stranger." I wanted to believe her. God knows I wanted to believe that this was just a bear or a big cat. But when we found the feathers, even Dr. Chen went quiet. They were scattered around a rock outcrop about halfway up the mountain, 18 inches long and black as coal, with an oily sheen that made them look almost wet. I'd never seen feathers that big, not even from eagles or condors. "These are," Dr. Chen started to say, then stopped. She picked one up and held it to the light. "This doesn't match any bird species I know." We collected every feather we could find and sent them to the state lab. The results came back 3 days later. Unknown protein structure. Possible prehistoric characteristics. Recommend further study. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those feathers. I sat on my porch with a beer and my old flight charts, trying to figure out how big a bird would have to be to carry off an 800-pound bull. The math didn't work. Nothing that big could fly, not according to everything we knew about physics and biology. But I'd learned not to trust everything I thought I knew. Around midnight, I heard my dog, Rex, start barking. Not his normal bark when someone came to the door, but a sound I'd never heard from him before. High and desperate, like he was begging for help. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Rex was in the yard, standing rigid and staring up at something I couldn't see. His hackles were up, and he was trembling. "What is it, boy?" Then I saw it. Perched on the big oak tree behind my cabin was something that shouldn't exist. It was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, with wings that hung down its sides like a black cape. Its body looked almost human, but covered in dark feathers. And its eyes glowed red in my flashlight beam, not like the reflection you get from a deer or raccoon, but like they were generating their own light. It sat perfectly still on that branch, which should have broken under its weight, and looked right at me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't work. Then it spread its wings. They were massive, easily 15 feet from tip to tip, and when they caught the moonlight, I could see they weren't like bird wings at all. They looked more like bat wings, but made of something tougher than sus. Kin. As it spread them, it made that sound again, that deep whistling that seemed to come from inside my head. Rex whimpered and pressed against my leg. The creature tilted its head, studying us both. Then, without any sound at all, it launched itself into the air and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long time after it was gone, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I checked the tree the next morning, I found claw marks in the bark. 4 parallel gouges, each one an inch deep. That's when I knew I was hunting something that was also hunting me. Over the next week, the attacks got worse. 2 more farms lost livestock. A family camping near the summit reported something landing on their tent in the middle of the night, its claws tearing through the fabric like tissue paper. A group of rock climbers found their equipment scattered across a cliff face with claw marks scored into solid granite. But the worst part was the pattern. Every attack happened in the same area, a rough circle about 2 miles across, centered on the highest peak of Cheat Mountain. Whatever this thing was, it was protecting its territory. I started spending my nights up there, watching and waiting. I brought my old military binoculars, a camera with a telephoto lens, and enough coffee to stay awake until dawn. I needed proof, something that would make people believe that this wasn't just a bear or a big cat. On the 5th night, I got more proof than I bargained for. I was set up in a clearing about a mile from the summit when I heard it coming. Not the whistling sound this time, but wings. Big wings, beating the air with a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. I turned my flashlight off and waited. It landed about 50 yards away in a meadow where the moonlight made everything silver. I could see it clearly through my binoculars. The muscular body, the enormous wings folded against its back, the red eyes that seemed to glow with their own fire. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second creature dropped out of the sky, landing next to the first. They were the same size, the same shape, but I could tell they were different somehow. Maybe male and female, maybe just 2 individuals of whatever species this was. They stood together in that meadow, and I swear they were having a conversation. Not with sounds, but with gestures, with the way they tilted their heads and moved their wings. Like they were planning something. That's when I made my mistake. I tried to take a picture. The moment the camera's flash went off, both creatures turned toward me. Their red eyes locked onto my position, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, animal terror that started in my bones and spread through my whole body. One of them took off and circled around behind me while the other started walking in my direction. Not flying, walking, with long strides that covered ground faster than any human could run. I ran anyway. I crashed through the woods like a drunk man, branches tearing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me with every step. Behind me I could hear them following, the whistle of wind through enormous wings, the soft thud of feet hitting the ground. I made it to my truck and gunned the engine, not caring about the noise or the headlights that would give away my position. As I drove down the mountain, I checked my rearview mirror and saw them standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go. When I got home, I locked every door and window in my cabin. Then I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the camera. The flash hadn't worked. The picture was black except for 2 spots of red light floating in the darkness. But those spots were unmistakable. The eyes of something that had looked right into my soul and found me wanting. I was in over my head, and I knew it. The next morning, Dr. Chen came to my cabin. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and she was carrying a thick folder full of purrs. "I've been doing research," she said without saying hello, "about this mountain, about the legends, about what we might be dealing with." She spread old newspaper clippings across my kitchen table. Headlines from the 1920s and 1940s. Giant bird terrorizes local farms. Mystery creature seen over mountain. Thunderbird returns to Sacred Peak. The Cherokee called them thunderbirds, she said. Guardian spirits that protected the mountain from those who would harm it. According to the stories, they were real creatures, not just legends. I told her about my encounter the night before. She listened without interrupting, making notes in a small notebook. "There's something else," she said when I finished. "I found records of similar sightings during times of stress. The Civil War, when they were logging the mountain heavily during the mining boom in the 1950s. It's like these things wake up when their territory is threatened." "What's threatening it now?" She pulled out a map marked with red X's. "Development. 3 companies have filed permits to build resort hotels on the lower slopes. Another wants to put in a ski area. If those projects go through, this mountain will never be the same." That's when it clicked. The attacks weren't random. They were warnings. The creatures, whatever they were trying to drive people away from their home. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We need help," she said, "and I know just who to call." 2 days later, a man named Joseph Crowfeather arrived at my cabin. He was Cherokee, probably in his 70s, with gray hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see everything. Dr. Chen had contacted him through the tribal council. "My grandfather told me stories about this place," he said as we sat on my porch. "About the guardians that lived on the high peaks. He said they were older than the Cherokee, older than any human tribe." "Are they dangerous?" "Only to those who come with bad intentions. They can sense the difference between someone who respects the mountain and someone who wants to harm it." That evening, Joseph led us up the mountain, not to hunt the creatures, but to try and communicate with them. He carried a leather pouch filled with tobacco and other things I didn't recognize. We climbed to a flat area near the summit, a place where the Cherokee used to hold ceremonies. Joseph built a small fire and began to speak in his native language, words that sounded like wind in the trees. For an hour, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped 20 degrees in about 10 seconds. The fire flickered and almost went out. And they came. 2 shapes dropped out of the star-filled sky, landing on opposite sides of our small circle. Up close, they were even more impressive than I'd imagined. 7 feet tall, with bodies that were part human, part bird, part something else entirely. But they weren't threatening. They sat on their haunches like giant cats, their red eyes fixed on Joseph as he continued his ceremony. Then, something impossible happened. One of them, the larger one, began to speak. Not with words, but directly into my mind. Images flooded my consciousness. The mountain as it had been centuries ago, covered in ancient forests. The Cherokee people living in harmony with the land. The coming of white settlers, the cutting of trees, the scarring of the earth. I saw the creatures awakening from some kind of long sleep, confused and angry at what had happened to their home. I saw them trying to drive away the threats, using the only methods they understood. "They're not monsters," I said, the words coming out without me planning to say them. "They're protectors." Joseph nodded. "The question is, will others see them that way?" As if in answer to his question, we heard the sound of helicopters in the distance. The military arrived at dawn. 3 helicopters full of soldiers with tranquilizer guns and nets. They'd heard about the creatures from someone. Maybe the state officials, maybe the scientists who'd tested the feathers. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they saw the thunderbirds as a threat to be eliminated or captured. I tried to Stop them. I really did. I explained about the Cherokee legends, about the creatures' role as guardians, about how they were just protecting their territory. But the commanding officer, a young lieutenant who looked like he'd never seen anything stranger than a pigeon, wasn't interested. "We have reports of dangerous animals attacking civilians," he said. "Our job is to neutralize the threat." The battle, if you could call it that, lasted about 10 minutes. The creatures were smarter than the soldiers expected. They used the mountain itself as a weapon, diving out of the sun so the men couldn't see them coming, using the rocky terrain to break up the military formations. And they had abilities that no one had anticipated. When the first helicopter got too close to the summit, both creatures released some kind of electromagnetic pulse. The aircraft's engines died instantly, and the pilot had to make an emergency landing in a meadow halfway down the mountain. The second helicopter tried to use tranquilizer darts. The darts bounced off the creature's feathers like they were armor-plated. One of the thunderbirds grabbed the aircraft's landing skids and spun it like a top before gently setting it down, upside down, but with no injuries to the crew. The third helicopter retreated to a safe distance and called for reinforcements. That's when Joseph stepped in. He walked up that mountain like he was going to church, carrying his medicine pouch and singing in Cherokee. The soldiers tried to stop him, but something about his presence made them step aside. I followed him, along with Dr. Chen and a handful of locals who'd come to see what the noise was about. We found the creatures on the summit, standing guard over their territory like ancient sentinels. Joseph spoke to them again in that language that seemed to come from the earth itself. He made offerings of tobacco and sat. And he told them, somehow, that not all humans were enemies. That some of us understood their purpose and respected their right to protect this place. The larger creature approached him, its red eyes fixed on his face. For a moment I thought it might attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head until it was level with Joseph's. They stayed that way for several minutes, perfectly still. Then the creature straightened up and released a sound different from any I'd heard before. Not the threatening whistle, but something that sounded almost like singing. The other creature joined in, and their voices rose into the morning air, like a hymn to the mountain itself. When they finished, both creatures spread their wings and launched themselves into the sky. They circled the summit 3 times, then disappeared over the far ridge. The military left that afternoon. The resort developers withdrew their permits a week later, citing environmental concerns. The Cherokee Tribal Council was granted co-management authority over the sacred sites on Cheat Mountain. As for me, I stayed on as the ranger in charge of the area. Part of my job now includes maintaining the relationship between the human visitors and the mountain's older residents. Once a month, Joseph and I make the climb to the summit, carrying offerings and making sure the ancient agreements are kept. I still see them sometimes, usually at dawn or dusk, flying high above the peaks. They don't bother the tourists or the locals anymore. But every now and then, when developers or mining companies start making noise about developing the natural resources of Cheat Mountain, they make their presence known. The mountain is protected now, both by law and by guardians older than law itself. And me? I finally found my place in the world. Turns out there was room for one more protector on this ancient mountain, even if he were as just a washed-up pilot who learned to believe in impossible things. Some nights, when the wind is right and the moon is full, I can hear them calling from the high places. It's not a threatening sound anymore. It's a song of the mountain itself, reminding everyone who cares to listen that some things are too sacred to be tamed or sold or developed. I sleep well on those nights, knowing that the guardians are still watching over us all. My name is Rebecca Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. I've pulled frozen hikers off mountains, talked jumpers down from cliffs, and searched for lost kids in forests so thick you can't see your own feet. But what happened at Blackwater Falls in January 1983 changed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I've spent my life protecting. I was 45 then, working winter recreation safety at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia. The mountains there are different from other places. older, deeper, with shadows that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. The Cherokee used to hunt in those canyons, and the old German settlers who came after had their own stories about things that lived in the ice. That winter was the coldest on record, 20 below zero most days, with snow piled 6 feet deep in the canyon. The kind of cold that hurts to breathe, where your spit freezes before it hits the ground. I knew those conditions well. I'd been an Olympic skiing hopeful once before a bad crash tore up my knee and ended that dream. The chronic pain from that old injury was my constant companion, especially in weather like this. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 6 cross-country skiers, all experienced winter campers, were overdue from a 3-day expedition in Blackwater Canyon. The Hamrick family had organized the trip, 3 generations planning to spend time together in the wilderness. Tom Hamrick, his teenage son Mike, Tom's father Earl, and 3 family friends. Good people who knew what they were doing. I studied their planned route on my wall map. They'd intended to ski down into the canyon, camp near the frozen falls, then loop back up through the Dolly Sods wilderness. It was ambitious but doable for their skill level, in normal conditions. But this wasn't normal weather. Last radio contact was Sunday afternoon. Dispatch told me. Tom Hamrick reported they'd made camp and conditions were stable. Nothing since. I looked out my cabin window at the swirling snow. The forecast called for another blizzard moving in, and the canyon would be completely cut off once it hit. We had maybe 12 hours to find them. I loaded my snowmobile with everything I might need: emergency shelter, medical supplies, extra food, and enough fuel for the round trip. My backup was Jim Knotts, a younger ranger with good wilderness experience, and Lisa Yeager, who'd joined the service just 2 years before but had grown up in these mountains. We also had a volunteer search team from town, led by Ed Simmons, whose family had lived in the area for 5 generations. The ride down into the canyon took 40 minutes, our machines struggling through snowdrifts that threatened to swallow them whole. The walls of Blackwater Canyon rise up like the sides of a frozen cathedral, dark rock streaked with ice where underground springs seep through. The whole place has a feeling to it, like it's watching you. Halfway down, my radio crackled with static. "Rebecca, you getting interference?" Jim's voice was barely audible through the electronic noise. "Yeah, atmospheric pressure maybe," I replied, but something about the static bothered me. It had a pattern to it, almost like whispers. We reached the canyon floor as the short winter day began to fade. The silence was absolute except for the crunch of our boots in the snow and the distant sound of wind through the rock formations above us. Even in normal times, the canyon felt isolated, but now it felt abandoned by the world entirely. "Tracks here," Ed called out, kneeling beside what looked like ski marks in the snow. I examined the trail. Definitely cross-country skis, and the depth suggested they were carrying heavy packs, but something was wrong with the chassis, and the tracks scattered and converged in ways that didn't make sense for a group moving together. "Looks like they were in a hurry," Lisa observed. I didn't answer right away. I'd seen panicked tracks before, but these were different. They reminded me of the time I'd tracked a deer that was being hunted by wolves. Erratic, desperate, running from something they couldn't fight. The wind picked up, carrying sounds from deeper in the canyon. For just a moment, I could have sworn I heard voices calling for help. Human voices, faint but clear. "Did you hear that?" Jim asked. We all stopped and listened. Nothing but wind now. "Probably just echoes," I said, but I didn't believe it. As darkness fell, we set up our own camp near the mouth of the canyon. Standard procedure was to start fresh in the morning, but those voices kept nagging at me. I knew we were running out of time. We found their camp at dawn. The scene hit me like a physical blow. 3 tents scattered across a small clearing, all of them shredded. Not torn by wind or collapsed from snow. Shredded like something had raked massive claws through the fabric. Sleeping bags were pulled out and ripped apart, their fillings scattered across the snow like confetti. "Jesus Christ," Ed whispered. I'd seen bear attacks before, but this was different. Bears were messy but methodical. This looked like pure rage. "Spread out but stay inside of each other," I ordered. "Look for survivors, but watch your footing." Jim found the first blood about 50 yards from camp, dark red drops in the snow leading away from the destroyed tents toward the tree line. The trail was easy to follow, too easy. It was almost like something wanted us to see it. "Rebecca, you need to see this," Lisa called from near a cluster of tall spruces. I made my way over, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Claw marks gouged deep into the bark of 3 trees about 8 feet off the ground. Each mark was as long as my hand, and carved so deep that sap had frozen into yellow icicles. "What kind of animal can reach that high?" Lisa asked. I couldn't answer. I'd worked these mountains for 2 decades and never seen anything like it. The blood trail continued into the forest, but now it was mixed with other tracks, human footprints, running, and something else. Prints I couldn't identify. They were huge, maybe 18 inches long with what looked like claw marks at the tips. The stride was impossibly long, like whatever made them was covering 12 feet with each step. "Ed, you ever seen tracks like these?" I called to our local volunteer. He came over and crouched beside the marks, his weathered face going pale. "My grandfather told stories," he said quietly. "Old Cherokee warnings about things that hunt in the deep cold. But I never—" He didn't finish the sentence. We followed the trail for another hour, deeper into the canyon. The strange prints led us toward the frozen waterfall, while the human tracks branched off in different directions. It was like the group had scattered, running in panic. That's when we heard the voices again. "Help us. Please, we're down here." This time there was no mistaking it. Human voices, coming from somewhere near the base of the falls. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, making it hard to pinpoint the exact location. "That's Tom Hamrick," Ed said. "I know his voice." I felt a surge of hope. "Jim, Lisa, secure a perimeter. Ed, you're with me. We're going down to the falls." The descent was treacherous. Ice covered every surface, and the frozen waterfall had created a maze of ice formations that twisted and curved in impossible shapes. The cold down there was different too, deeper, like it was coming from inside the earth itself. "Tom, can you hear me?" I shouted. "Rebecca! Thank God, we're trapped behind the ice. Mike's hurt bad." The voice seemed to be coming from directly behind the frozen waterfall, but I couldn't see any way through the solid wall of ice. I examined the formation more carefully. The ice was thick, maybe 3 feet, and it had an odd quality to it, almost translucent, with shapes moving inside like shadows. "Hang on. Tom, we'll get you out," I called. But as I said the words, doubt crept into my mind. The voice sounded right, but something about the way it echoed was wrong. It seemed to move, shifting from one part of the ice wall to another. "Rebecca!" This time it was a different voice. Mike, the teenager. "Please hurry. It's so cold." I pressed my ear against the ice, trying to determine the exact location. That's when I felt it. A vibration in the ice, like something large moving on the other side. But the movement was wrong for trapped humans. It was too fluid, too purposeful. "Ed, get back to the others. Tell them to bring all the heating equipment we have." Ed nodded and started climbing back up the icy slope. I stayed by the falls, listening to the voices that continued to call for help. But the longer I listened, the more convinced I became that something was very wrong. The voices were too clear. After 3 days in this cold, trapped behind ice, they should have been weaker, more desperate. Instead, they sounded fresh, almost conversational, and they kept repeating the same phrases, like a recording stuck on loop. "Rebecca, help us. We're so cold. Mike's hurt bad." I pulled out my emergency radio and tried to contact Jim. Static filled the airwaves, but underneath it I could swear I heard more voices, dozens of them all calling my name. That's when the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the span of 30 seconds. My breath turned to ice crystals before it left my mouth, and the radio batteries died with a soft click. I was alone at the base of a frozen waterfall, listening to voices that might not be human, while something large moved behind walls of ice that shouldn't exist. For the first time in 20 years, as a ranger, I was truly afraid. When I climbed back up to find the others, Ed Simmons was gone. He never made it back, Jim reported, his voice tight with worry. We heard him calling for help about 20 minutes ago, but when we tried to follow the sound, we couldn't find him. I felt ice form in my stomach that had nothing to do with the cold. What kind of calling? Said he'd fallen through the ice near the creek bed. But Rebecca... Lisa paused, looking confused. His voice seemed to move around, like he was running while he talked to us. I closed my eyes and fought down panic. The voices behind the falls, now Ed's disappearing act, a pattern was forming that I didn't like. Pack up everything. We're moving to higher ground. As we broke camp, I noticed the dogs Jim had brought were acting strange. The German shepherds, trained for winter rescue work, kept whimpering and pressing close to our legs. When Jim tried to put them on the scent trail Ed had left, they refused to follow it. Instead, they pulled away from the area where his tracks disappeared, hackles raised. I've never seen them act like this, Jim said. It's like they're terrified of something. We set up a new camp on a ridge overlooking the canyon floor, with clear sight lines in all directions. As darkness fell, I assigned watch schedules. Nobody would be alone, and we'd keep the emergency flares ready for signaling. But at 2 a.m., during Jim's watch, we lost Lisa. I woke to the sound of Jim calling my name urgently. She was right here, he insisted, sitting by the fire, writing in her logbook. I looked away for maybe 30 seconds to check the perimeter, and when I turned back, she was gone. Lisa's gear was still there, her book open to a half-finished entry about the strange ice formations near the falls. But there were no footprints leading away from the camp. The snow around the fire was undisturbed except for our own tracks. "Lisa!" I shouted into the darkness. Her voice came back immediately. "I'm okay. I found something amazing, and down by the falls. You have to see this." The voice was definitely Lisa's, with her slight mountain accent and the excitement she always got when she discovered something new. But it was, coming from the canyon floor, at least 500 feet below us. "Stay where you are," I called. "We're coming down." "Hurry," she replied. "But be careful. The ice formations down here are incredible. They look almost like rooms, like someone built them on purpose." Jim and I geared up quickly, leaving the dogs tied to a tree. As we descended into the canyon, Lisa's voice kept calling to us, guiding us toward the frozen waterfall. But her directions didn't make sense. She'd tell us to go left, then her voice would come from our right. She'd say she was near the creek, then call from up near the tree line. "Something's wrong," Jim muttered as we navigated between ice formations that did in fact look artificially constructed. Walls and arches of ice created a maze-like structure around the base of the falls. "I know," I replied, "but we can't leave her." That's when we found the blood. Not drops this time, but pools of it, frozen into red ice. Too much blood for someone to lose and still be walking around calling directions. And mixed with the blood were pieces of fabric that I recognized, torn strips from Lisa's winter gear. "Rebecca! This way!" Lisa's voice called cheerfully from deeper in the ice maze. "I found where Tom's group is hiding." I raised my hand to stop Jim from following the voice, because now I could see the source of the sound, and it wasn't Lisa. Moving between the ice walls was a shadow. Tall, much taller than any human, with arms that hung too long and moved in ways that defied anatomy. It was perfectly camouflaged against the ice and snow, visible only when it moved between different patches of moonlight. The shadow raised its head and looked directly at us. Even from 50 yards away, I could see its eyes reflecting light like an animal's. Red light, bright and intelligent. "Rebecca?" Lisa's voice came from the creature's direction, but now I could see its mouth wasn't moving. The sound was coming from somewhere else entirely. "Why did you stop? I'm right here." Jim grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But as we turned to retreat, we found our path blocked by ice walls that hadn't been there before. The maze had changed while we weren't looking, trapping us in a narrow corridor that led only toward the creature. "Help us!" Now it was Tom Hamrick's voice coming from the shadow. "We're so cold." The creature took a step toward us, and I could see its true size. 8 feet tall, covered in white fur that seemed to absorb moonlight. Its claws scraped against the ice as it moved, creating the same gouges we'd found on the trees. "Please," Mike's teenage voice now, desperate and afraid, "don't leave us here." But it wasn't just mimicking voices anymore. I could see shapes moving behind it, human forms suspended in the ice walls like flies in amber. And one of them, closest to the surface, was wearing Lisa's distinctive red winter coat. The creature opened its mouth, revealing teeth designed for tearing, not chewing. When it spoke, it used Ed's voice. "Come join us, Rebecca. The cold doesn't hurt once you stop fighting it. Jim died trying to protect me." The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to, covering the distance between us in 3 silent bounds. Jim pushed me aside and raised his rifle, but the beast's claws caught him across the chest before he could fire. I'll spare you the details of what happened next. Just know that Jim Knotts was a good man who died bravely, and that his sacrifice gave me the few seconds I needed to understand what I was facing. This wasn't just a predator. It was something far older and more intelligent. The way it had constructed the ice maze, the tactical use of our friends' voices, the calculated psychological warfare, this creature had been hunting and for a very long time. I ran deeper into the maze, using my knowledge of ice formation and winter survival to find paths the creature's size couldn't follow. Behind me, I could hear it, calling to me in Jim's voice, then Lisa's, then voices I didn't recognize, probably decades of victims. The center of the maze opened into a large chamber behind the frozen waterfall. And that's where I found them. Dozens of people perfectly preserved in supernatural ice, their eyes open and aware. I recognized Tom Hamrick and his son Mike immediately. They were conscious but couldn't move, couldn't speak, trapped in some kind of living hibernation while the creature fed slowly on their life force. Lisa was there too, already partially encased in the strange ice that seemed to form from the inside out. Her eyes tracked my movement, and I could see terror and recognition in them. But it was the older victims that made me understand the true scope of what I was facing. Bodies in clothing from the 1970s, the 1960s, even earlier. This thing had been hunting in Blackwater Canyon for generations, awakening during the coldest winters to feed and then hibernating until conditions were right again. Beautiful, isn't it? The creature had followed me into the chamber. Up close, I could see the intelligence in those red eyes. The careful way it positioned itself between me and any possible escape route. It was savoring this moment. "They don't suffer," it continued in Ed's voice. "The cold takes the pain away. They dream warm dreams while I feed on what makes them human." I still had my emergency flare gun and 1 heat pack left. Not much against a supernatural predator, but I was starting to understand something about this creature's nature. "You can only exist in extreme cold," I said, backing toward the ice wall where Lisa was trapped. The creature tilted its head, curious. "The deep cold is where I'm strongest, yes, but I've adapted to survive longer now, store more energy from each feeding. But the Cherokee stories say you hibernate when it gets warm. That's why you need the life force to sustain yourself until the next cold snap." Its eyes narrowed. "Clever little ranger. Yes, I sleep in the earth when the world grows warm. But this winter has been so perfect, so much colder than usual. I may be able to stay active for years with enough stored life force." I was calculating distances, planning my desperate gambit. The emergency flares burned at nearly 2,000 degrees. If I could create enough heat in this enclosed space. "The problem is," I continued, "you've made this chamber too enclosed. All this ice, walls and ceiling, it's going to trap heat just as well as it traps cold." The creature realized what I was planning a split second too late. I fired both flares directly at the ceiling of the ice chamber, then activated my emergency heat pack and threw it at the base of the nearest wall. The temperature spike was immediate and dramatic. Steam filled the chamber as ice began melting from surfaces that hadn't seen warmth in decades. The creature shrieked, not with any human voice this time, but with a sound like breaking glass mixed with a winter wind. I could see it becoming translucent as the temperature rose above freezing. Its supernatural ice began to crack and melt, releasing the trapped victims who gasped and cried out as feeling returned to their limbs. But the creature had one last, desperate attack. It lunged at me with claws extended, using its remaining strength for a killing blow. My old Olympic training saved my life. 25 years of muscle memory kicked in, and I dropped into a defensive crouch that redirected the creature's momentum past me and into the rapidly melting ice wall. The impact shattered the supernatural ice completely. Water cascaded through the chamber as the creature's form began to dissolve. Its eyes met mine one last time, alien, intelligent, and filled with a rage that had lasted centuries. Then it was gone, leaving only rapidly melting ice and 8 very cold, very confused, but very much alive human beings. The helicopter evacuation took 4 hours, and every one of us made it out alive. The official report listed it as a successful winter rescue operation following an avalanche incident. The victims were treated for severe hypothermia and frostbite, but all made full recoveries. The families were reunited, the community celebrated, and I received a commendation for heroic service. But that's not the whole truth. Tom Hamrick and the others remember being trapped in the ice. They remember the creature, the telepathic influence, the feeling of their life force being slowly drained away. Mike still has nightmares about red eyes watching him from snowy places. Lisa left the Ranger Service 6 months later and moved to Florida, where she works on beaches now and never complains about the heat. I've stayed in the mountains, but I monitor weather conditions more carefully now. I've learned that creatures like the one we faced exist in other places too. Anywhere that extreme cold can create the right conditions for their hibernation cycles. Climate researchers have started finding unusual ice formations in locations around the world, always associated with missing person reports during record-breaking cold spells. The Cherokee were right about many things. Nature has rules we don't fully understand, and when conditions become extreme enough, those rules can allow very old things to wake up and hunt. I'm 57 now, and my knees hurt more each winter, but I still lead search and rescue operations when people go missing in extreme weather, because I know what's really out there in the deep cold, and I know how to fight it. Most of the time when people disappear in winter storms, it's just the cold and the elements that kill them. But sometimes, maybe once every 20 or 30 years, when the conditions are perfect, it's something else, something that's been waiting in the ice for exactly the right moment to feed. Last month, I got a call about unusual ice formations spotted by satellite in northern Alaska. The temperature readings were the lowest ever recorded for that region, and 3 research teams have gone missing in the past 6 weeks. I'm too old for this kind of work now, but I've started training a new generation of rangers in what to look for, what to listen for, and most importantly, how to make things very warm very quickly when the cold starts to feel hungry. Because the beast of Blackwater Falls wasn't unique. It was just the first one I met. Winter is coming again, and it's been a very cold year. My name is Catherine Hawthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years now. I work at the New River Gorge in West Virginia, where the mountains rise like green walls and the river cuts through rock older than dinosaurs. Most folks know about our big bridge, the New River Gorge Bridge that's famous for bungee jumping and base jumpers. But there's another bridge in our park that people don't talk much about. The old Bluestone Railroad Bridge. I became a ranger because of my friend Sarah. We went to college together, studied engineering, had plans to build bridges and skyscrapers. But Sarah got sad, real sad, and one day she jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. I couldn't save her. So I came here to these mountains to make sure other people stayed safe on bridges. Funny thing about fear, I was scared of heights my whole life, but after Sarah died, I made myself climb. Had to. If I was going to keep people safe, I needed to go where danger was. November in the gorge is hunting season. The leaves are gone. The trees look like skeleton hands, and fog rolls up from the river most mornings. It was a Tuesday when Sheriff Mills called about the Bluestone Bridge. Cat, he said. That's what everyone calls me. We got reports of a woman screaming out at the old railroad bridge. 3 different hunters heard it over the past week. Says it sounds like someone's in real trouble. The Bluestone Bridge sits about 700 feet above the New River, built back in 1895 when coal trains ran through these mountains. Now it's just for hiking, though not many people use it. Too far from the parking lot and the trail's rough. Plus, locals tell stories about that bridge, always have. I drove out in my Park Service truck, a beat-up Chevy that's seen better days. The trail to the bridge winds through oak and hickory trees, and it's quiet up there. Too quiet, really. Most places in the Falls. Rest, you hear birds, squirrels, something moving around. But near the Bluestone Bridge, everything goes silent. The bridge itself is solid steel and stone, built to last forever. It still looks good after all these years, though the railroad stopped using it decades ago. When you stand on it, you can see the New River far below, white water rushing over rocks. On a clear day, you can see the newer bridge downstream. But that day, fog was rising from the water, making everything look ghostly. I brought Tom Bradley with me. He works maintenance for the park, knows these old structures better than anyone. Tom's been here longer than me, seen everything there is to see. Or so we thought. Bridge looks fine, Tom said, checking the railings. Solid as the day they built it. But something felt wrong. The air was colder on the bridge than in the forest. My compass needle kept spinning. And when I tried to call the office on my radio, all I got was static. You ever hear stories about this place? I asked Tom. He nodded, not looking at me. Old-timers talk about a screaming woman, say she's been here since the 20s. That's when we heard it. Faint at first, like wind through the steel cables. But then clearer, a woman's voice, crying. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the cliff walls. Tom went pale. That's not wind, he whispered. I looked over the railing, down into the gorge. The fog was thick, but for just a second, I thought I saw something white moving down there, like a dress caught in the wind. Hello? I called out. Are you hurt? Do you need help? The crying stopped. Everything went dead silent. No river sounds, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing. We need to search the area, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Someone might be trapped down there. But even as I said it, I knew we weren't dealing with someone. Nehu was just lost. We spent 3 hours searching that day. Went down into the gorge using ropes, checked every ledge and crevice where someone might have fallen. Found nothing. No person. No camping gear. No sign anyone had been there in months. But we did find things that shouldn't have been there. Wet footprints on the bridge deck, even though it hadn't rained in days. Small prints, like a woman wearing dress shoes. They led from one end of the bridge to the middle, then just stopped. Not at the railing where someone might jump. Just stopped, like the person had vanished into thin air. These are fresh, Tom said, kneeling down. The prints were clear in some morning frost that shouldn't have been there either. November in West Virginia isn't that cold yet. Then I found the fabric. A piece of white silk caught on the bridge railing, fluttering in the breeze. It was cold to the touch. Not just cool, but ice cold, like it had been in a freezer. And it was damp, though everything else was dry. This looks old-fashioned, I said, holding it up. The fabric was good quality, but the style looked like something from decades ago. Like from a wedding dress or something formal. Tom didn't answer. He was staring at the bridge cables above us. Cat, he said quietly, look at this. The thick steel cables were vibrating. Not swaying like they should in the wind, but vibrating like guitar strings. And they were making a sound, low and humming, but almost like voices whispering. I got out my camera to document everything. Every time I tried to take a picture, the lens fogged up. I'd wipe it clean, and it would fog again immediately. My radio kept cutting in and out, picking up what sounded like old-time music, the kind they played in the 1920s. We should head back, Tom said. He looked nervous, and Tom's not the nervous type. File a report, come back tomorrow with more equipment. As we packed up, I heard it again, the crying. But this time it wasn't coming from below the bridge. It was coming from the bridge itself, like the steel and stone were weakened. Ping! I looked back one more time before we left. There, in the middle of the bridge, stood a woman in a white dress. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with dark hair. She looked sad. Not just crying sad, but deep down, broken sad. She raised her hand like she was waving at me. "Tom," I called, but when I turned back, she was gone. "What?" he asked. "Did you see—" I started, then stopped. How do you explain something like that? That night, I went to the county library and looked up everything I could find about the Bluestone Bridge. What I found made my skin crawl. 23 women had jumped from that bridge since 1920. All young, all unmarried, all pregnant. Back then, if a girl got pregnant without being married, her whole family would disown her. The whole town would turn against her. Some of these women were just teenagers, kids really, with nowhere to go and no one to help them. The first was Mary Ellen Bragg, age 19, November 15th, 1924. The newspaper barely mentioned it, just said she died accidentally at the bridge. But the death certificate told a different story. Each woman's story was the same. Pregnant, alone, ashamed, desperate, and every single one of them jumped from that bridge on a cold November morning. The last entry I found was from 1962. After that, nothing. But according to the sheriff's reports, people had been hearing screaming from the bridge ever since 1924. Hunters, hikers, even railroad workers when the trains still ran. I drove home that night thinking about Sarah, about all these forgotten women, about the sadness I'd felt on that bridge. It was like the place soaked up pain and couldn't let it go. I should have known then that this wasn't just about investigating some strange sounds. This was about 23 women who died thinking nobody cared about them, and they'd been waiting almost 70 years for someone to prove them wrong. I went back to the bridge the next morning at dawn. Alone this time. Tom had called in sick, said he'd been having nightmares all night about falling. I didn't blame him. I'd barely slept either. The fog was thick that morning, rolling up from the river like smoke. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, but I could hear things moving in the mist, footsteps on the bridge deck, the rustle of fabric, whispers too soft to understand. I set up my equipment at the north end of the bridge and started recording everything. Temperature, humidity, electromagnetic readings. The numbers didn't make sense. The temperature dropped 15 degrees as I walked toward the center of the bridge. My compass spun like a carnival ride, and my radio picked up voices, women's voices, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. That's when I saw the first one clearly. She stood at the bridge's center, hands pressed against the railing. Young, maybe 18, wearing a white dress that looked like it came from the 1940s. Her hair was done up the way women wore it during the war. She was crying, shoulders shaking, and she kept looking down at the water far below. "Miss?" I called out. "Are you okay?" She turned to look at me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. But when she opened her mouth to speak, no sound came out. She pointed at herself, then at her belly. Even through the loose dress, I could see she was pregnant. "You're safe now," I said, walking toward her slowly. "Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Let me help you." She shook her head and stepped backward, one foot on the railing, then both feet. She was going to jump. "No!" I ran toward her, but my feet felt like they were moving through mud. Everything slowed down like I was running underwater. She gave me one last look, sad but grateful, like I was the first person who'd tried to help her in a long time. Then she fell backward into the fog. I reached the railing and looked down. Nothing. No splash. No sound. No body falling through the mist. Just empty air and the river 700 feet below. But when I turned around, there she was again, standing in the same spot, hands on the railing, crying, like she was stuck in a loop, playing out the same moment over and over. "Oh God," I whispered. "You're not alive, are you?" She looked at me and shook her head. Then she pointed behind me. I turned around and saw them. All of them. 23 women in white dresses from different decades. Young faces, sad eyes, all of them pregnant, all of them lost. They stood in a line across the bridge like they were waiting for something. The one closest to me spoke, and her voice sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "You can see us." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "I can see you." "No one else has. Not for so long." This was a different woman, older, wearing a dress from the 1930s. "They just hear us screaming." "Why are you screaming?" "Because it hurts," said a third woman, barely more than a girl. "Dying hurts so much, and staying here hurts more." I looked at each face, seeing the pain that kept them trapped. "What do you need? How can I help?" The first woman, Mary Ellen Bragg, I realized, stepped forward. "We're forgotten. No one knows our names. No one knows why we died. They just call us the Screaming Bridge Ghost, like we're one person, one story." "But you're not," I said. "You're 23 different people with 23 different stories." "Yes," Mary Ellen said. "And until someone remembers us, really remembers us, not just the scary stories, we can't rest." The temperature dropped even more. Ice started forming on the bridge railings, even though the sun was coming up. The river fog swirled around us like a living thing. "There's something else," Mary Ellen said. "Others come here now, sad people like we were. And we can't help ourselves. We call to them. We want them to join us so we won't be alone." My blood went cold. "You mean—" "People jump from this bridge now because of us. We don't mean to, but our sadness is so strong it pulls them in." I thought about Tom, how he'd gotten sick after visiting the bridge, how he'd talked about nightmares of falling, how I'd been having thoughts about Sarah, about joining her every time I stood at the bridge's center. "How many?" I asked. "3 this year," Mary Ellen said sadly. "Good people who just needed help, like we did. But our grief is like a poison now. It spreads." The other women nodded, and I could see the guilt in their faces. They were trapped by their own pain, and that pain was hurting others. "What if I remember you?" I asked. "What if I tell your stories?" "Would you?" Mary Ellen's face lit up with the first hope I'd seen. "Would you really?" "Yes," I promised. "But you have to stop calling to people. You have to fight against that sadness long enough for me to help." The women looked at each other, then back at me. "We'll try," Mary Ellen said. "But hurry. November 15th is coming, the anniversary of my death. On that day, our pain gets stronger. We might not be able to control it." I looked at my watch. November 8th, 1 week. "I'll hurry," I promised. One by one, the women faded away until only Mary Ellen remained. "Don't forget us again," she whispered, then disappeared into the morning fog. I stood alone on the bridge, ice melting around my feet as the sun came up. 7 days to save 23 trapped souls and stop more people from dying. I'd better get started. The next 5 days were the hardest of my life. I barely slept, barely ate, just researched. I drove to every small town around the gorge, visited every cemetery, looked through every old newspaper I could find. Mary Ellen Bragg, 19, from Glenjean. Her boyfriend left town when she told him she was pregnant. Her family threw her out. She lived in the woods for 2 weeks before she jumped. Susan Price, 22, from Thurmond. Her father was the town preacher. When he found out she was pregnant, he told the whole congregation she was bono. As a sinner. She walked to the bridge the next morning. Dorothy Cook, 18, from Fayetteville. Her married boyfriend promised to leave his wife. Instead, he had her committed to an asylum. She escaped and made it to the bridge. 23 stories. 23 young women who died because the people who should have helped them turned away instead. By November 14th, I had all their names, all their stories. I'd contacted the local newspaper, the Historical Society, even found some living relatives who never knew what really happened to their family members. We planned a memorial service for the next morning, November 15th, exactly 70 years after Mary Ellen's death. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. So I drove out to the bridge at midnight just to check on things. Tom was already there. He stood at the center of the bridge, hands on the railing, staring down into the darkness. But something was wrong with him. His face was blank, his eyes were glassy, and he was smiling. But it wasn't Tom's smile. "Tom?" I called out. "What are you doing here?" He turned to look at me, and when he spoke, his voice sounded different. Higher, like a woman's voice coming through his mouth. "Catherine, you came back." "Mary Ellen?" I whispered. "We tried to wait," Tom said in that wrong voice. "But the anniversary is so strong. We can feel all the pain from 70 years ago. We can't control it anymore." I looked around and saw them, all 23 women, but they looked different now, angrier. Their white dresses were stained with river water and blood. Their faces were twisted with pain and rage. "We want the hurting to stop," Mary Ellen said through Tom's mouth. "And if you join us, if you bring others, maybe we can all feel better together." "No," I said, backing away. "That's not what you really want. You don't want to hurt people." "Don't we?" Another spirit spoke through Tom, her voice layering over Mary Ellen's. "Everyone hurt us. Everyone turned away. Why shouldn't we hurt them back?" More voices joined in, speaking through Tom until he sounded like a chorus of angry women. "Jump with us, Catherine. Bring your friend Sarah. Bring everyone who's ever felt pain. We'll all be together and the hurt will stop." Tom stepped up onto the bridge railing. He was going to jump, and there were 23 vengeful spirits ready to catch him and make him one of them forever. "Stop," I shouted. "This isn't who you are. You're not murderers. You're victims." The voices laughed, but it was a sound like breaking glass. "What's the difference?" "The difference is choice," I said, stepping closer. "You didn't choose to die. You were forced to it by people who should have loved you. But right now, you're choosing to hurt others. That's not the same thing." Tom wavered on the railing. The spirit voices got quieter. "You want to be remembered," I continued. "You want people to know your names, your stories, your lives. But if you hurt innocent people, all they'll remember is the harm you caused. Is that really what you want?" "We just want the pain to stop," Mary Ellen's voice said, and now she sounded like herself again. Young, scared, hurt. "I know," I said, reaching out my hand to Tom. "And tomorrow it will. Tomorrow everyone will know who you were. They'll know your names. They'll know you were loved, even if the people who should have loved you failed." Tom's eyes cleared. He looked around, confused and scared. "Cat? What am I doing up here?" "It's okay," I said, helping him down from the railing. "You're okay." The spirits appeared around us, but they looked like themselves again. Young women in pain, not monsters seeking revenge. "You promise?" Mary Ellen asked. "Tomorrow people will remember us?" "I promise," I said. "But you have to let go of the anger. You have to trust me." One by one, the women nodded. The temperature on the bridge started to warm up. The ice melted away. "We'll wait," Mary Ellen said. "One more day. But if you break your promise—" "I won't," I said. "I swear on my friend Sarah's memory. I won't forget you." The spirits faded as the sun began to rise. Tom and I stood alone on the bridge, both of us shaking. "Did I almost?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "But you're okay now. We're all going to be okay." I hoped I was right. November 15th dawned clear and bright. By sunrise, 47 people had gathered at the Bluestone Bridge. Families of the women who'd died, local historians, newspaper reporters, even some tourists who'd heard about the memorial service. I stood at the center of the bridge with a list of 23 names and read them aloud, one by one. For each woman, I told her story. Not just how she died, but how she lived. Mary Ellen, who loved to sing. Susan, who wanted to be a teacher. Dorothy, who drew beautiful pictures. These women died because they were alone and afraid, I said. Because the people in their lives chose judgment over compassion, shame over support. We can't change what happened to them, but we can remember them as they really were, not as victims or ghosts, but as people who deserved better. After each name, someone threw flowers from the bridge into the river below. White roses for innocence, red ones for love they should have received. As I read the final name, Mary Ellen Bragg, a warm wind swept across the bridge. For just a moment, I saw all 23 women standing with us, smiling, really smiling, for the first time in 70 years. "Thank you," Mary Ellen's voice whispered in my ear. "We can rest now." Then they were gone. Not vanished like before, but gone in the way that feels peaceful, complete. The Park Service installed a memorial plaque on the bridge the following month. It lists all 23 names and includes these words: "They were not forgotten. They were loved." Tom went back to work, though he still gets nervous around high places. The bridge area came back to life. Birds returned, the temperature stayed normal, and families started using the hiking trail again. I kept my job, but I changed how I do it. Now I train other rangers in crisis intervention. I keep suicide prevention resources at all the trailheads. And I make sure that anyone who seems lost or alone gets someone to talk to. Because I learned something important from those 23 women. People don't become dangerous ghosts because they're evil. They become trapped because they died believing nobody cared about them. Every November 15th, we hold a memorial service at the bridge. It's become an annual thing. People come from all over to remember not just the women who died there, but anyone who's ever felt alone and forgotten. The bridge doesn't scream anymore. Sometimes on quiet mornings you can hear something like singing carried on the wind. But it's not sad singing. It's peaceful, like a lullaby. I still think about Sarah sometimes, wonder if I could have saved her. But now I know that some people can't be saved. They can only be remembered with love instead of regret. The Bluestone Bridge taught me that healing doesn't always mean bringing people back. Sometimes it just means making sure they know they mattered. And in the end, that might be enough.